Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session on OpenAI to catalyze digital economy in Africa. I urge the few scattered people in the room to come and join us in the front. Maybe we can make more of a conversation of this. And thank you for staying for this last session on the second last day. I know it's been very intensive, but we'd like to have this important conversation. We've got these great panelists with us. So let's begin. We've also got Stella online, who's going to do the content moderation. We've got Kojo Bokwe, who's the VP of Public Policy, Africa, Middle East, and Turkey for Meta. We have Dr. Tobias Thiel, who's the director for the GIZ for the African Union. I'm not going to do my bad German on that. It'll have to do. And we've got Adil Suleiman from the African Union, Senior Policy Advisor, I believe, as I remember, in the Information Society Division 2, I believe. So thank you, Adil, also for stepping in for the African Union here. And then, of course, we also have Barbara Glover online, who's the Program Officer of the African Union's high-level panel on emerging technologies and has been centrally involved with the development of AI policy on the continent. So thank you, Barbara, for joining us, I believe, from Johannesburg. I'm going to start by just asking you all, before we get into the issues of what AI can do for SMMEs and for the digital economy in Africa, to tell us what you understand by this rather controversial, I think it used to be a kind of accepted good, but what do you understand by OpenAI before we try and look at what it can do for Africa? Kojo, you want to give us a run at that?
Yeah, I can try, and then I may attempt to reframe it slightly. But first of all, I'd like to say a huge thanks to the government of Norway for putting on another wonderful IGF, as well as many of the support staff from what I assume is the Nova Spectrum team. And then Alison did a wonderful job of introducing the three of us, myself and my two learned colleagues, but also, hopefully, many of you know Alison Gilwald, the work of Research ICT Africa, the impact it has had on policymaking, not only on the continent that is most close to my heart, but globally as well. So give her plaudits. I hope you'd already read the bio.
Thank you so much, Kojo. I think this is the second panel I failed to introduce myself. It's not because I expect everybody to know me. It's just getting onto these interesting topics.
So I think the question was, as you posed it, was what was the impact that OpenAI may have on Africa? And my colleague,
No, I'm actually asking you a question before that.
Okay.
I'm asking you, what do you understand as Meta, in your role as Meta?
Yeah.
How do you define, how do you understand OpenAI?
So I would reframe it more as open source AI rather than OpenAI, because otherwise my competitors at OpenAI would be delighted that I'm going to wax lyrical about them rather than ourselves. So I understand it as a huge opportunity for the continent first and foremost. I'm not going to get into the kind of technical parameters. Anyone who's been in the conference over the last 4 days will understand there are closed models and open models, and they're on a spectrum, some more closed than others, and Meta has gone a long way since 2023 to put open source models, our llama models, in the hands of entrepreneurs, NGOs, governments, researchers, academics, anybody who wants to use OpenAI, open source AI, you've got me now, open source AI in a way to resolve their issues, meet their commercial goals, meet their public sector goals, all kinds of stuff. What I understand most is the opportunity in front of us. So there was a chap here from one of our fellow tech companies, Microsoft, who put on this history of technological revolution. The cotton ginny from the Industrial Revolution wasn't there, but a number of things were. The combustion engine, a few other things, this timeline. And I've always been struck by this as I think about open source and the fact that we are putting it in hands of people, the fact that the llama models have been downloaded more than 1 billion times now, that at each of those stages, the continent that is closest to my heart and beyond, the region I look after, Africa, Middle East, and Turkey, probably weren't at the forefront of those technical revolutions, whether it was land, labor, capital, technical devices in the hands of people. You and I have been working on mobile telephony and internet for a very long time. And we've always felt to be behind the curve a little bit, with all due respect. This feels as though, despite the fact that major big tech companies appear to be driving it, at least on behalf of Meta, this feels as though we are presenting an opportunity through open source AI to put those technical tools in the hands of those who probably most need them. This idea of catching up through mobile telephone or catching up by putting the internet into people's hands has worked to an extent. But because we've been behind the curve, we probably haven't seen the impact we'd like to see. I think open source presents an incredible opportunity to do that. If we get, and as we'll go on to speak about, policy and regulation and all that kind of stuff right, equity and safety and responsible AI and all of that kind of stuff right, I think it presents, first and foremost, a wonderful opportunity.
Okay, so lots to come back to there. Tobias, why don't you say what either you or what GIZ understands OpenAI to mean?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Alison, for having me. It's really a great pleasure to be part of this critical conversation on the benefits of open source AI. I mean, on your question, I would define it mostly as an opportunity for the continent. I think that's really what captures for me, and also that's the position of GIZ in terms of what's the essence of open source AI, because I think we believe that for digital transformation to be truly inclusive and developmental, it really needs to be open. It needs to be openly sourced, and that means there needs to be open access, there needs to be open infrastructure, and there needs to be open innovation, and I think that really captures the spirit. It's of course part of the principles for digital development, and I think an essential part really if we want to leverage the opportunities for the African continent and beyond.
Thank you so much. Barbara, I'm going to ask you to help us by saying, we've been told open source AI is an opportunity. I think both have qualified by saying they're talking about open source AI. But perhaps you can help us by telling us, what is closed AI and what is open AI? Why should we be excited about open AI?
Yeah, thank you, Alison, and thank you to all the organizers for this event. I think that open source AI presents immense opportunities, at least for the African continent. We are looking at opportunities where our young innovators that we work with, who ordinarily will not be able to have the costs or the funds needed to get proprietary software when it comes to AI innovations, have that opportunity to still build AI models and tools. I'll give a good example of the work, for instance, we're doing with Meta on the MSMEs and how we can utilize some of these e-learner platforms to offer our young innovators with the opportunity to also be in the AI ecosystem and develop their tools and software building on this. The closed source AI option would be one that would require a certain level of investment that for low or middle income countries will be something that the average young innovator will not be able to afford. For instance, when you look into some of the repositories in GitHub related to machine learning and AI, you would see a breadth of resources that are being useful to our young people that help them to develop the tools, whether it has to do with AI applications in healthcare, AI applications in African local languages. They have that opportunity or that leapfrog to be able to develop tools that are needed to address present challenges. So I do see open source AI as a great opportunity that we should be leveraging.
Thanks so much, Barbara. Adil, maybe you can just build on that by telling us what role OpenAI or how AI fits into the African Union's continental AI strategy.
Thank you very much, Alison. I think this is a very pertinent question because you need to know what is it so that you can tackle it correctly. But if you don't know the definition, so I'm wearing my policy hat, so I'm not going to give you a technical definition. But as my colleague said, it's an opportunity for Africa. Particularly, Africa is trying to achieve its agenda, 2063 agenda. And we see it as an enabler to achieve this agenda in light of the recent AI strategy that we've developed. I think, as mentioned by our sister here, that is the closed AI is very expensive. For Africa, of course, we are resource limited. So if OpenAI is going to be good for Africa, we have use dividend that we can use, entrepreneurs who can be engaged in the OpenAI. There is transparency where community can work together to build systems, OpenAI systems, and I think that's also an opportunity. We are aware of the challenges of OpenAI in terms of security, in terms of intellectual properties issues, but I think the benefits outweigh these issues. And as mentioned by the first speaker, that I think the policy, our role is to make it to provide the conducive environment for the African youth, the entrepreneurs, so that they can use it safely, and then we can scale up AI across the continent. I think also it's also an opportunity to have an Africa we want in terms of AI. So it's an African-led AI. I think we have islands of excellence across Africa where countries like they're excelling in certain aspects of open source AI. We can leverage all this area of excellences in terms of infrastructure, in terms of capacity, in terms of systems and coding and all this technical stuff. So together, I think we can build something really huge and fantastic towards the realization of the AI strategy. By the way, one of its goals is to for the socio-economic development and then enabling the attainment of the Agenda 2063, but also for inclusivity, so that everybody is going to be part of this journey, as got about this undertaking. And I think since it's cheap, it's available, and I think that then Africa can make the best out of this technology and systems, so that we can leapfrog into the 21st century. Thank you.
So Adil and in fact Tobias and Kojo too, and I think probably the way that Barbara expressed that, it's kind of implied in what you said. But I mean, you've all spoken about these opportunities, and you've all indicated that there are challenges in seeing these benefits. I mean, currently, as applied with some of these things, initiatives that you're trying to do on the continent, who can be beneficiaries? We've got over half the population of the continent who are not connected to the internet. We've got a dearth, we've got fantastic, brilliant data scientists. They lack access to data, they lack access to computing power. And we certainly don't have the capabilities in the public sector, large parts of the private sector. And certainly not in most of the SMMEs that you're about to talk about. Which are much higher percentages. 75% are actually informal, above 75% probably are informal sector. And even if they have access to the internet, they're not using it for internet purposes and those sort of things. They have a smart device and many of them don't. So, how do we get to this opportunity that you've been speaking about from where we are now? So just let Adil just finish that, because he raised the inclusion thing, and then I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I think it's a very pertinent question, by the way. And it's valid not only for AI, for everything we do in digital. We have this, we lack fundamentals. We have to work on the fundamentals on the digital space. But to me, what I see the opportunity, the issue we're going to face when we do scaling. When you scale, the systems, I think you will face this issue because you don't have connectivity, but you can build the focus point of AI in the cities, like when you start building this center of excellences in the cities where you have connectivity, And I think, yes, we're going to face the issue of scaling when we come to launching AI in the rural, remote areas and things like that. But of course, there is also, in terms of infrastructure, where we can, deploy DPIs and then maybe community-led solution instead of having AI deployed, all the benefit of AI deployed across the board. Like, I give you example. For instance, in the Agenda 2063, we are focusing on education, health, right, fintech, and agriculture, right? So we see the communities where, like, for instance, we need to focus more on agriculture. So then we tailor our solution. Connectivity is going to be part of the equation, but then we are going to be solution-based. We talk to our international partner, to the government, to the private sectors, researchers, and then entrepreneurs, and then even the company, big tech company, so that all together we join hands. And I think part of the deployment of these solutions is going to be the fundamentals, like the issue you mentioned, which is, of course, we are facing across the board. But these fundamentals are going to be embedded in the solution that we provided, like if it's education, if it's health services that we are going to provide, and so forth. I know it's not easy, but of course, this fundamental, of course, is going to be a big issue. I think the questions in front of us, whether to first work on the fundamentals and then do AI, or do them in parallel.
And I think we don't have options. We have to do everything at the same time, which is always our challenge in every area. But just before Kojo comes in, so we know that the major problem for digital inclusion is not just connectivity. We've got most of the continent covered, and we've still got these very, very low penetration rates, especially in least developed countries. So this really presents a skill in terms of having the skills in order to become representative in these databases and things like that. So I think it's a bigger challenge than connectivity. It's this big human development challenge that we have to address at the same time. And maybe AI can help us with that. But you're speaking specifically about the digital economy and using AI to catalyze the digital economy in this session. So, Kojo, why don't you tell us what Meta's vision is in this regard?
So I'll do that as I attempt to answer that other question as well, which I think you rightfully put, because all four panelists, and I wish there was a fifth, who was less enthusiastic about open source AI, because I think that might make an even more interesting conversation. But I think the question you then put was, that I felt you were putting was, there's great opportunity in front of us. How do we make sure the millions of people who aren't, that it happens? And I think Adele's right. There needs to be this continued investment in connectivity. I still believe that's an issue. You might talk about mobile coverage being extensive and people...
I think it's the human skills to use the internet.
I agree, so I'm going to touch on that as well. I still think there's work we need to do, and as Meta we have done, on subsea cables and the capacity to take things internationally and across the continent. That's so important if we need to get the price point to where it is completely affordable. And my colleagues, I sit on the board of the GDIP with Sonia George and many others that you know, which are still looking at affordability and inclusion, and it's still a challenge. And I think investments like the To Africa cable that Meta is invested in, the first cable to link west to East Africa, or if you're East African, east to West Africa, whatever way you like, around circumventing or going around Southern Africa the first time, helps with that, as do investments by other companies who, for this purpose, will remain nameless, but you can, Google have done some fantastic work there as well, so not so nameless. You then need to start thinking about the kind of investment. It's not a build and they will come. It's been downloaded 1 billion times, but we've also done work since 2023 to catalyze usage. So our Llama Impact Grants were a fantastic initiative launched in 2023. Thousands of applications for these grants, between 50 and 200,000. And 2 of the winners of that impact grant were African players, Digital Green and Jacaranda Health, who have gone on to do fantastic work to resolve some of the issues that are most important. So Digital Green does information to farmers through SMS in rural areas built on Llama, helping revolutionize yields and farming outcomes. Jacaranda Health does work with maternal health, with women having children, post and pre, and improving outcomes. Those sorts of things help. At the same time, our team has just launched, closing tomorrow, if you have time, do apply, the Accelerator Grant for Llama as well, which is giving NGOs, commercial players, mentors, or potential commercial players, mentors and support to use these technologies to meet these goals. And I think that's the part of the way to go in there. Continued investment in connectivity, efforts to bring down the cost of devices. I saw Dr. Indemo in the halls earlier, and I'm still call him a mentor of mine, in part because of the effort he made in Kenya to take the price of the tax on mobile devices off, and then you see penetration, not rocket science, penetration jump by 200,000. We need vision and initiatives like that. You need training programs like the ones I've mentioned, impact grants, accelerator grants. But at the same time, something that we're beginning to focus on is how do you help governments? I travel across Africa, Middle East, and Turkey. I see the government of Turkey doing things, UAE and KSA doing amazing things, Ethiopia doing amazing things. Bosun, the minister from Nigeria, was here. They've bought chips themselves and are starting to use Llama as well. How can companies like ours work with governments to get them to use it as well? And I think that creates a multiplier effect. If you have countries in which some may argue the social contract between government and people has broken down completely, and you give governments the opportunity through Llama to try and revolutionize the judiciary, education systems, health systems, etc., those people who may not be able to use Llama, who don't want to code on Llama, but just want the benefit of it, have access to some of the benefits of it. Finally, Alison, because I know I've taken a bit of time, the other thing that we feel is super important, in part to give people access, in part, in my view, to dispel this concern about the risks of AI, which are valid and we need to work on them, is to get it on people's devices. Some amongst the first countries in the world to see Meta AI, and I know there are other apps that many people use, but Meta AI on people's devices were places like Ghana and Nigeria, where we put it, embedded it in WhatsApp and Facebook to give people access and to give people an opportunity to use what is at the moment a very basic form of AI. You ask, what's Kojo Boakye talking about today? And it might. I'm not that famous.
But it even comes even if you don't ask it. You get it anyway.
And we're trying to ward against that, and hopefully you can lock it down. But giving people access to it is going to be super important and helping them resolve issues. So if you're in Ghana or you're in Nigeria, where uptake has been fantastic and retention has been fantastic, we're seeing young Africans, young, old, middle-aged Africans using AI and clearly gaining benefit from having access as well. So it's those investments, it's that vision, it's executing along the whole, if you want to call it a value chain, but along every area that's important to making sure the opportunities that all four of us have spoken about actually come to fruition.
So Kojo, I'm going to go very quickly after this to hear some more of the possibilities, use cases, the interesting things that we can catalyze AI. Get AI to catalyze the economy. But the things you've been speaking about would enable the economy, get people actually using this technology in their daily lives, and those who are connected and online, and meaningfully online. But a lot of the critique has been about the embedding of these systems in our local systems. And so, we become locked into these. I mean, Adele was speaking about, deployment of DPIs and the obviously enormous potential for AI in producing, making those more effective, efficient. But the danger, of course, there is that although people, data scientists who are using Llama say that there's a kind of front-end openness to it, but there's actually not a back-end openness to this that would allow them to be developing stuff that they can build on independently and pass on. So just to respond, because I think that is what some people would regard as a risk, is that you actually, these big tech systems are now embedded in your local public sector, your social systems, everything else.
So a couple of things. If I understand your question correctly, I think we want to give people control over their use of Meta AI within their apps. So
users.
Yeah, users.
Data scientists.
When it comes to data scientists and researchers who download and use Llama, I think they will argue that the weights we share, and I think with Llama 4, I wish I was an engineer here, but with Llama 4, we've shared more information than ever before in terms of transparency. One of the major benefits of open source than ever before will give them control. The ability to fine-tune, the ability to assess the data that we share, that we use to train the model, is pretty open. I think I started my intervention with the first question by suggesting there is no binary open and closed. I think there are models that will be deemed closed, far more closed. We believe our model is open, fine-tunable, trainable, and adaptable. And I think in part the feedback we get from the community, some better than others most of the time, but the feedback we got from the Llama 4 wasn't great initially, but has improved. The feedback we get from the community not only helps us create a better model next time, but is also evidence of the fact that the data science community, the people who don't just want to use AI, but want to train it and fine-tune it and all those kind of things, are actually see a lot of benefit from doing it. So I push back slightly on that.
Okay, we'll come back.
Yeah.
Let's give Tobias a chance. Tobias, you, I mean, maybe just also because I saw you were nodding to some of these, what is GIZ doing in terms of developing more sort of organic, maybe indigenous, or enabling people to be able to respond to these open source AI options that are becoming available?
Yeah, so I would say in the first place, GIZ, of course, approaches the issue of AI primarily from a developmental angle and not from a commercial one. So as a development agency, we don't pursue any economic profit sort of objectives. And we have quite a vast digital portfolio on the continent. I mean, whether at the continental level with our friends from the African Union, whether with the regional economic communities, bilaterally down to the community level. And perhaps one interesting case that we have an initiative called Fair Forward, Artificial Intelligence for All, and there we're basically working to really build inclusive AI ecosystems. So we partner up there with a lot of local organizations for initiatives like the Lacuna Fund or the Open for Good Alliance to address one of the, I would say, most major AI gaps in the global south, which is data. Mm-hmm. And so what we do, we help local researchers and innovators to create high-level or high-quality labeled and localized data sets. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, the data is the backbone that really matters. And the idea is then to use these data sets to tackle real-world challenges in sectors such as agriculture, energy, education, health. I mean, basically across the board of the sectors that we work. And maybe to make it a bit more tangible, I think a few examples of how we do that, where we really try to create a value added for local communities is there, for example, AI is used through picture recognition for local farmers, where you can take a picture of a plant and diagnose sort of pests and develop adequate responses, or satellite data that's being analyzed by AI to identify good places to build local renewable energy in communities that are not electrified, which then will also have a positive impact on the community overall. Perhaps another important part of this program, of this initiative, is language. Language is really a core pillar, and there we work with Mozilla's Common Voice, and we basically support the co-creation of open speech data sets in also languages that usually are not covered. I mean, we know there are thousands of different languages on the continent. So one particular case, we work on Kiswahili and Luganda, both Bantu languages that are undercovered basically in commercial AI systems to make them more inclusive. We also work with a project called AI Made in Africa, where we try to make existing data available to researchers and innovators so that they can really create solutions that African solutions for African problems, actually, which is one of the mottos of the AU. I still think it's important, though, to recognize that there's a bigger picture here, and I think that what we do in terms of access is important, but it's also not enough. I mean, I think when we see what has been discussed here in the various panels that we had this week, there are really a lot of challenges, and you mentioned also initially that we can't do only one thing and wait for the other, but we need to tackle these challenges simultaneously. And I think beyond data access, I think there's also an issue in terms of digital literacy. I think we need to build stronger digital literacy, tailored capacity building, and that both for regulators but also for innovators. I also believe that it's important to ensure that any AI tools have a proper maintenance strategy, that they're improved, maintained, and secured in the long term. And I think that's also where open source governance can play an important role. And lastly, and I think that's really perhaps one of them, probably the most challenging point, is that I think we need alliances to really develop shared computing infrastructure. And that's because that's really the most resource-intensive part, especially in underserved regions. So, yeah, I think we have to be also a bit realistic in terms of what open source AI can do. I think it's not a silver bullet either. I mean, it has some potential for leapfrogging, but at the same time, if we're really realistic, I think we have to recognize that it cannot fully fix the inequalities, the geo-economic inequalities between the global north and south. I mean, there are simply some hard facts in terms of GDP, in terms of market sizes and so on that I'm sure you know much better than me, but what kind of considerations go into that. But despite this, I really believe that open source AI can make a difference if we connect the dots. I think it's the best shot we have to really support leapfrogging for the continent.
Thanks very much, Tobias. Adil, maybe just sort of building on that, we've got the AI continental strategy in place, and you've said that the open AI or open source AI is a principle behind it. But a lot of the challenges at the moment lie around the implementation of that. I think we have, a scattering of different AI blueprints, things that have come at different times, doing different things, representing different interests. A lot of them, other than the continental strategy, foreign funded, foreign driven, different agendas on those. How do we ensure that we begin to get the framework, and I think with the continental data framework, data policy framework, we do have some of the governance underpinnings for that, but how do we extend that implementation so that this enabling environment that can manage the risk, that can enable local entrepreneurs, local scientists to use open source for, in the public interest or for Africa?
Sure. I think we are working on another framework for open source data. And it's going to be reviewed and considered by the ministers by the end of the year, early November. And also, we are also drafting an implementation strategy, and M&E also part of this implementation strategy. Same is going to be also looked at during the ministerial meeting end of this year. So I think we are not, at the Commission, we are not addressing open AI as such, but they are doing all the homework, all the enabling environment for open AI, so that when it's being recognized and it's being launched, then everything is fundamental is there to be able to make sure that we launch it safely and also with all the barriers removed. I think originally, I think you raised a very good point about the fact that we need to make sure that when we do open AI in general, and specifically open source AI, we need to make sure that, the AU Agenda 2063 and the AI strategy is talking about the Africa we know, Africa first, and all that, and the sovereignty of Africa. I think we need to make sure that these solutions are not going to be to cause us more problem than benefits. I think OpenAI give us this opportunity so that we are going to be doing things within Africa and making sure that we don't repeat the experience of the social media and all that, because we didn't have control over this all this new technology coming to Africa. And I think for me, the metric would be if the African government and the African communities, the African families, they can control what part of AI they want to take and what part of AI they don't want to consider, because otherwise then you lose your sovereignty. And I think one way is to do it at home, even though it's going to be difficult, but you have to do it locally so that you can control what aspect of AI, because there is also a cultural and tradition aspect of it, because the culture in the West is not the same as the culture in Africa. So we just need to make sure that when we build it, so we build it the way that is going to satisfy all this requirement in terms of the cultural and in terms of the tradition and so forth. So I think for me, as I said, the metric, like in my family, do I have control what kind of AI systems and applications that are going to be in my family, or we don't have? Mm-hmm. As a country, do I have control what aspect of AI I want to use and what aspect of AI I don't want to use? If I fail that, I think we failed in terms of, the Africa we want and all the technology we want.
Okay, maybe it's a question we can get an answer to from the floor. Do we have control from countries, from a sovereignty point of view? Do we have control over what AI is coming into our countries?
And what's the risk of control? Sometimes there's a couple of things.
Absolutely. Can we just get Barbara? Can we get Barbara into that? Because we'll come back to that, because I think we actually are getting onto some of the risks and some of the risks of control, which you've identified as well. Barbara, you're working with scientists and maybe scientists who are also working as entrepreneurs, actually, with startups and various things. So just speak about, is OpenAI seen, or open source AI seen as this sort of fabulous opportunity? Because I think a lot of these, you've spoken about them yourself with your partnerships with Meta, and how people have responded to these. And what feedback do you get? Because I do know you've dealt with data scientists who are often feeling sort of squeezed out of, for example, large local language modeling, because the data and that translation, all the technology already exists, with Google or AWS, or somebody can come in and do something very quickly, and that actually local scientists could do if they were given the opportunities and things to do that. So just in the context of open source AI, just speak about some of the positive and possibly negative things if you do come across them.
So thank you for that. I think that I'll start with the negative and end with the good. In terms of OpenAI, I think one of the raising concerns has been trust, just trust in the OpenAI system, and the need for more understanding of what that means, and getting more young innovators to be interested, or the scientists and the data scientists that we work with. And I think also OpenAI cannot thrive if there isn't effective data harmonization or policies even that encourage sharing of data. So well, I wouldn't want to name, but there are some innovators, for instance, that have approached certain bodies to get some data that can feed into the work that they're doing. But even though there are policies that support this, they are not able to access that data because the data harmonization frameworks are not being implemented as effectively as it should be. And so then they get frustrated in that there is open source data on paper, but it's not being seen on ground. But one thing that that highlights the positives of us looking more and more at open source AI approaches is the fact that I don't know how many people in the room read the article that New York Times released, I think, a week ago, looking at the location of data centers across the globe. So you see so many of the places had blue dots all over, and then you come to Africa and it's just a streak down there in South Africa. These are realities. So Africa probably won't be a leader in high performance computing. It won't be a leader perhaps in data center location from what is currently being seen, or even in cloud infrastructure. So we need to look then at what is our niche, what is it that we can do better. And I think that these are the opportunities that open source AI provides. It provides our young people with that opportunity to create a niche for Africa in this space, whether it's we have over 60% young population, and these are talented people that are using these IT skills to dance on TikTok. How can they leverage some of that in using it to address real challenges that are happening on the continent? And those are the opportunities that I believe that open source AI provides that we should not miss. We're just wrapping up, for instance, our AI and Health conference here in Cairo, and one of the discussions was on us trying to avoid boiling the ocean, trying to avoid, I have seen more and more in these AI conversations on the continent, yes, African solutions, African people, and the messaging around that. But we also want to look at how realistic some of these ideas are. What is it that we can leverage on Africa, as Africa? What kind of unique niche we have that we can utilize more effectively? And I believe that's where this open source structure provides that opportunity. Our young people don't have to wait for government to catch up on infrastructure, to catch up on supercompute and all these issues before they can, harness the world of AI. I think it's a great opportunity that we should not be missing. And that's one thing that as African Union Development Agency, we have tried to bring into conversations when we meet with local innovators. What is it that you can do with the now? Realistically as Africa, yes, we have dreams of how it should look like, but realistically in the settings, what is it that you can leverage? I was listening to a presentation again by Meta where they were showing what has been done, I think in Tanzania, where they're using the Llama platform for malaria elimination efforts. And then the presenter was saying, they didn't even approach Meta to do this. They went ahead, got into the platform, accessed it, and they use it for great stuff. And I thought, this is what we want to see our young people do. And this is what open source AI provides for us. And we should be leveraging these things, address your own problems without necessarily waiting for the great infrastructure that, and the great data centers that other countries may have and that we unfortunately may not have as a continent. We are shaping that conversation more and more. I'm happy to hear from our partner, our colleagues from the African Union Commission that you're developing the open source framework. I think that this is timely. And I think as a development agency, we'll be happy to shape that input and be able to ensure that our young people are leveraging this within the African niche and strengths to be able to harness AI effectively.
Barbara, thanks so much for that. We're going to come to some of the challenges, but I'm also aware of the time, and I know you've also got exciting initiatives that you want to speak about that are going to catalyze the digital economy in Africa. But before we can go into the risks and straight on to the opportunities that you want to speak about. But I thought if we could quickly just see if there's some questions from the room before we go into the next section. Or Christelle, if we've got any questions online.
I think there's a question there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Osei Keja from Ghana. I would like to ask two questions. Okay, I'll exercise very to one. The path of AI is sort of path of riches when it comes to Africa. And distinguished panelists have articulated the challenges and all that. But I'm curious, how can Africa, we advance AI and other emerging technologies at a fraction of the billions, the trillions that are being spent in the global north, while still ensuring equity and the long-term health of all these new tools or say new technologies? What current models can be replicated? Okay, let me keep this.
Thank you so much. That's a great question, and hopefully our panel can answer that as we move on to that next section, because I think the question of ensuring, equity, safety, a lot of the things that you were speaking about really speak to this enabling environment we want. So we do want to enable people to be able to use the technologies. We do want to enable investments in these technologies. And, it doesn't all have to be large language modeling and generative AI. There are lots of other local AI models and systems that we can be developing. But what are the governance, maybe not regulation, but I think probably regulation and governance frameworks that we need that are both protective but also enabling, that will ensure people have access to open source systems or to be able to deploy those for their other purposes. Koja, did you want to just, because you started on speaking about the control, but
yeah, I think it's a mix of things, and I thought I was grateful for Osei's question about equity. I wasn't sure whether the question was about when the world is, tech players are investing 65 billion as we are this year, how do you have equity and all kinds of stuff. I think we've kind of spoken to the fact that open source at this point in time with regard to AI and the opportunity in front of us is probably the only way to level the playing field. Certainly at Meta, that's how we see it, by putting models into people's hands, and they don't need to invest 65 billion to create a model that's specific to Kumasi, where both Osei and I are from, that you can fine-tune and build something local for that region to meet that issue. I think that's going to go some way to doing it. I don't think you're ever going to be at a stage, or in the near future, not ever, I don't think you're going to be at a stage in the near future where an African company is going to say, here's 65 billion for 2026 or 2027 to invest in compute. So I don't know if you're going to get equality in that kind of way. I'll stress now. Although I pray and earnestly believe God will answer, at some point in the near future we will have that. On the issue of leveling the playing field for what I'll go back to my bread and butter, policy and regulation. I think there are some obvious and key things that we can do. First of all, we have to be included in the conversation and include ourselves in the conversation. They are ongoing. I was speaking at UNGA in 2023 at Secretary Blinken's event at the time, and we were speaking about everything from responsible AI, the need for red teaming and benchmarking and all of that kind of stuff, which is a conversation that has continued. And that speaks to some of the ways we might drive equity, inclusion in terms of language and all kinds of stuff, which Meta is working on with No Language Left Behind and Africa Next Voices with the Gates Commission, all kinds of stuff, to drive increased equity. But we need to have policymakers included. The reason why I was asking about control, which I hope is linked to this a bit, Alison, is that control can be misinterpreted. I'm a historian. My first degree is African history. My second degree was development. My master's was development studies, political economy, looking at the history of Africa, how it developed and all kinds of stuff. I appreciate we have to learn from the past and past mistakes. And Adil spoke to the concerns around social media, and that should inform how we look at AI. Completely get it. I respect the office and every government. My view is that they should retain sovereignty and maintain it. I'm on record as saying that now. But I do have concerns when people start speaking about control, because control, for me, negates in some ways, or may, in some jurisdictions and with some governments, negate what I have a bias and believe in, which is the ingenuity, innate ingenuity and brilliance of young Africans. who, if we put these tools in the hands of people right now, will create the solutions. And I've spoken to some of those, whether that be Vax Llama in Nigeria, or Jacaranda Health, or Fundamate in South Africa, now serving 3 million people. These are ideas that were born in the minds of Africans and developed and executed using Llama and AI. And those things, despite having some semblance of control in their policy and regulatory environments, have gone on to do amazing things. So I get it, and I get governments want to understand what's happening and have some control and put policy and regulation in. But I do say we should have caution if we want to grab the full opportunity that this presents. I think we need to have some caution around it.
So perhaps just to quickly pick that up, and then we're coming back to the clever things that are going to be offered to catalyze the economy. But I think when we were talking about control, we were talking about controlling big tech, not the small tech. But just to take that idea, because I think it is an important one. Yep. I think, where you don't have, democratic human rights, people-centered frameworks, and you've got access to very powerful technology, and you control that access, very bad things can happen. But assuming you've, within normative frameworks, international frameworks that we have, I think particularly in Africa and the work that we are doing within the G20, our first African G20, I think there's a lot of recognition that in fact you do not get equity, you do not get innovation unless you create the conditions for innovation. And unless you actually regulate access to data, you're not going to just get it, or you're not going to get necessarily what you need, unless you access, unless you regulate mechanisms to open up, compute power, these kinds of things.
Right.
You're not going to get. So I think there's a strong argument. I'm completely with you on kind of political control of this is problematic, and it needs constraints and safety nets and all sorts of things. But in order to make this work in Africa, we do have to regulate the conditions that will protect people's harms. But as I said, importantly for this session, but also for Africa, the enabling conditions for this to drive, catalyze the digital economy that we've spoken about. So Adil, just in the continental framework, there's, reference to the kinds of governance that one would require for AI on the continent.
Yeah, I think maybe also I'm going to link it to the answer to the question from the floor. Yes, I think I am optimistic, unlike the questioner, because I think this is an opportunity. Africa can make the best of it. As mentioned by Kojo, I think it's open source AI can maybe level the playing field. And I think some of the policy that we are pushing is like, for instance, we have in terms of open innovation platforms so that everybody will be part of the innovation journey in Africa. I think is important. And on the capacity building, I think we need to have a holistic approach to capacity building. You start from even early education, PhD, and then just make sure that we have it from A to Z. Everybody is well capacitated. At least the community is aware of the pros and cons of AI and how to handle different things. So I think this is also another thing that we could do. Also sharing platforms, infrastructure platforms, so that people can work on AI and innovation. I'm a strong believer in the minds and skills of African, I think, and they're predominantly youth, young people. Young people, they can do wonder if you give them the tools. So I think maybe the next big thing is going to come out of Africa if you go that route. The other thing also, true, if you work individually as a countries, I think maybe you don't go far. We have to work collectively, the African country, because we see like there's some advanced country in Africa who are doing very well in terms of AI, certain aspects. So we need to leverage all this expertise in Africa and just make sure that we work collectively on AI. And that's why I talk about the sovereignty aspect. I'm not talking about the political control, whatever. It's just you just do things that because we want the Africa we want, right? So we need to work towards that. This is the Africa we want. Like, for instance, we are doing AI for development. We are not doing lethal, we're not going to pursue lethal use of AI. So, but if you leave it open, it will come to you. And then the world is going to be a disaster. It's going to be uncontrollable, the situation. So that's what I meant when I said, So you have to have some control. You need to do development. You need to have inclusion. You need to have all this, objective that we have under our EU Agenda 2023. So to do that, you need to make sure that is in-house. You do it in-house. Even though you will struggle in the beginning, but I think over time, you will get there.
Yeah. So, Tobias, I mean, some of the issues we're talking now, this kind of collective and harmonized frameworks and things, are the things that would provide Africa with the kind of economies of scale and scope that these data and AI kind of markets need. And GIZ's been working with African Union and institutions, regional economic communities on the continent to achieve this. But just, how far are we, and what are the kind of urgent issues now to move that forward? I'll just give you a very quick example. With the African Union Data Policy Framework, we had a whole lot of fantastic principles, including the idea of creating public value, because there was all this public data that we needed to get out there and make available to people, but which, in order to deal with some of these enormous competition challenges and asymmetries of big tech providers, that we would want preferential access to open data, to public data, for local entrepreneurs and that kind of thing before it gets gobbled up. But that was completely prevented by the African Continental Free Trade Area digital protocols, which are cut and paste from WTO, and so trade always trumps everything else. So just in terms of you're working on the continent, you've been supporting these initiatives. There obviously still a lack of coordination at some level, around these are all African Union initiatives, but we're still in our kind of silos, our digital sector silo and our trade silo, and that. What are the challenges there from supporting this? Agenda 2063, etc., that we all committed to.
Yeah, I mean, maybe before I answer your question, just allow me a few sentences to react on what my peers on the panel said with regards to regulation. I mean, I'm a strong believer that it's really not about control. I think we have there's too much danger in calibrating this wrongly, especially when you see the different types of leadership that you have on the continent or beyond. And I think in that sense, I think it will be easy for us to agree that we need a fair and enabling and risk-conscious and equitable regulation. I think for me, the more important question is actually what is the process to get there. And I think what's really essential there is the need to have really collaborative partnerships where you bring the variety of different perspectives together, and that's the public sector or regional institutions like the African Union, that's the private sector, that's academia, that's civil society, that should also be actually users and beneficiaries perspectives, youth, women, and so I think if we ensure that we have the right process, I think that will really be the way to help us calibrate regulation in a proper way. And I think in that sense, the African Union plays a really important role as a continental norm setter. Yeah? And I think some of the frameworks, you mentioned the EU data policy framework, I think is an extremely important prerequisite. I think the key challenge that I see there is really how do we get this on the ground. I mean, we are working with limited resources. I mean, the program that we have to help domesticate the EU data policy framework has currently requests from 35 different African states to help put this framework, which is unless it's implemented, it's a document that has no value. We have 35 requests of different African countries who want us to support them to implement that, and then it becomes again a question of resources. I think another important aspect also to calibrate regulation well is, I think, also one of bargaining power. I mean, I had, in the context of this week, I had a number of bilaterals with a number of African digitalization ministers. And I mean, when you look at this from the perspective of some of the quite small states with populations of 2-3 million inhabitants, where you maybe have not more than 300,000 connected users, and even that is probably an overcount. What kind of bargaining power do you have in that? And that's where I think it's also important that AU member states really get together, whether under the framework of the AU, whether under the framework of regional blocs, to really pool resources and increase their bargaining power. I mean, it's the same thing that the European Union does in a global context when it comes to negotiations with the United States and so on. So I think those are some realities that we really need to take into consideration.
Vas, I'm sorry, I'm not going to return to the question that I actually asked after that, because we're running out of time, and I want to see if there's an online question from Christelle. Christelle, can you hear me and can I hear you?
Yes.
Good.
There is a question online. How can open source AI communities in the African continent be supported and sustained? This is from Ghana Hub, IGF.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you.
Christelle. Is there another question?
I think somebody was attempting to ask a question.
There's a gentleman here.
Okay. Christelle, is there another question online? We'll just take a couple and then people can give a scattered response to close off.
It was the only one.
It was only
Thank
one. Okay, thank you. We've got another question in the room. And then, Barbara, we're going to start with you so that you can lead off the answering the questions.
Yeah, generally to the panelists, I think the question of Africa's position on AI is something that, as Adil has pointed out, they're quite proactive in establishing. And as we know, the WSIS Plus 20 review process is coming up. Africa has taken a proactive step even before this particular process comes up to issue various frameworks, as you've rightly pointed out, the AUDPF, the position paper on the GDC, the African contribution, the AI strategy. Are we seeing in the future a position where continentally or at member state level a departure for the adoption of open source AI to boost the digital economy? Is it something that you, the panelists, would support, even if it's in contravention or it's in opposition to Africa's position on the use or regulation of AI? So that's my question to you, because as we are quick to see the adoption of open source AI as an opportunity, we also need to look at the sustainability from a policy standpoint, the adaptability, what that really means when it comes to member states enforcing their interests. And I think you've touched on this question a bit more, that's why I sat down. But the question then arises, with the WSIS Plus 20 process coming up and all these other parallel processes globally, continentally, do we see a situation where Africa has to then concede and take up open source AI for economic benefit in contravention to its policy standpoint? Thanks.
Before you leave, can you just clarify the position that you're saying is different, that is different from Africa's position in WSIS? Which specific position are you speaking about?
No, I'm not saying there's a different position. I'm just saying the process is coming up, and one of the elements that are going to be discussed is AI and data governance.
Okay.
As a bit of,
Okay, so where should we be? Where should we stand on that?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Barbara, if you would take any question you'd like, but I think the first question particularly is geared to the work that NEPAD's doing in this area and trying to enable access to OpenAI.
Yes, thank you for that. I think our approach has been to look at open source AI, not in just the idea of training coders for the purpose of training coders or getting people into AI just for the purpose of it, but we are trying to look at a problem-solving approach to some of these communities. For instance, with our Youth in AI Robotics competition, where we have these innovators grouped into categories. Each of these categories are addressing a problem, whether it's healthcare, education, mining industry challenges, whatever pressing issues we have as aligned to Agenda 2063 and then the Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa. So we are framing those community outputs into tangible impacts. And I think that's how we can ensure that these communities become sustainable, because you are solving real-time problems. And it's also when it comes to education systems that build up these communities, where we want to look at domain-specific AI education. So you're not just giving broad AI and then the person is a master of everything, but how do we contextualize some of these communities to provide education in specific sectors, whether, again, in health or agriculture education, where AI is seen as, I think as one of the panelists said, as a roadmap to development and not just the new technology, cutting away from the buzz and just looking at practically how we can use it to address many of these problems. We are doing that already with our innovators in AI and robotics competition. This year, we just rounded up that competition. We had over 2,000 submissions, and the idea is that once we profile them and look at what levels they are, whether they're prototypes or those that are in the field, we'll then also move them into an accelerator hub to look at how we can get them to look at some of these innovations and solutions in a more domain-specific approach, addressing problems that have been identified as challenges on the continent from our policymakers and our decision makers.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And I think this nuancing that Barbara is trying to get to this discussion, what AI are we talking about? Who can actually use this? What is the purpose of it? The sectoral applications of it is really going to help us move this ahead. What is pragmatic to do here? What is the potential there? And perhaps something we haven't actually discussed very much is, we've spoken a lot about regulation, but within regulation, of course, there great utility in incentives. So maybe also just as you wrap up, to just speak about from your perspectives where you are, what those might be, but to answer the more political question on where Africa's position on this should be within the context of this action line within the World Summit of the Information Society.
So I'm going to try and attempt to answer both questions. One, my view has been for at least 35 years that closed mouths don't get fed. So on the question about the community and how they can leverage open source AI more, I think there is first a need for the community to come together, and there are so many across this continent that are already doing that, but grow those communities is important. And then for those communities to access the kind of programs that Meta puts out, whether it be the impact grants I've spoken about, the accelerator, as well as other companies put out. Every time I go on LinkedIn, I see a program being provided by Google, by Microsoft, by other smaller players involved in this space. So I think there's a lot out there for the community, and we should continue trying to invest in it and grow that piece. The gentleman's question I didn't quite catch, Alison. Is there this decision we'll have to make on whether we use open source AI and sacrifice something else is kind of what I got. I speak to ministers, heads of state, regulators across the continent, and we started off with this panel by all in unison saying this is a huge opportunity that we need to seize. As I think about kind of how governments are approaching this for the most part, they're all trying to seize this opportunity. And even the AU as a body, an august body for kind of coordinating and trying to drive the harmonization is doing it. We've done some work with ALDA NEPAD, the AU Development Agency, to develop a llama-based app to help small and medium-sized businesses. The core of this session was about how do we grow the economy, to help them understand how they move their businesses from, how they open businesses in countries across borders. All of that speaks to us. And I think that's a ringing endorsement from the African Union as well as governments to kind of the opportunity in front of us. I'm not sure at this stage about getting more granular. I see a hard decision to make for the continent at the moment. Maybe I'm not understanding the question properly, but that's how I see it.
I think part of the question was just, I think there's this big commitment, a lot of enthusiasm, but I think, it's not unconditional. That it needs certain conditions to be enabling, it needs certain conditions to not perpetuate,
some of the
amplify inequalities, etc., etc. So I think that was sort of the question. Tobias, we are time up. I'm going to give you a minute, and I'm going to give Adil a minute, and we'll be talking to ourselves and probably lose our sound as well.
Okay, so I'll try to cope with the challenge of answering 7 questions with 0 seconds of time.
Yes, something like that.
No, I mean, maybe just a few selected points. I mean, first of all, I would find it presumptuous to lay out what I believe should be the African approach to AI, regulation, implementation, and so on. I think I would hope for it to be an African-led process that's truly African, that's truly inclusive, that's enabling, business-friendly, but also risk-conscious. I think those are, from my perspective, the key elements, but I think the local ownership is really perhaps the most important part. So, on that. The other thing is that I'm really convinced that the future of AI in Africa will not be built in silos, and I think in that sense it has to really come from collaboration. And I mean, speaking now from the perspective of GIZ, I mean, we see ourselves very much. We're not primarily a tech organization. We see ourselves as a convener, as an enabler, and in that sense, we're happy to play our role also to provide a bit the glue that holds these collaborations together.
Thanks so much, Tobias.
Yeah, so as a matter of principle, I think we've been consistent in the African Union Commission. We want AI for peaceful and socio-economic development, and we are also advocating for ethical use of AI. This has been articulated in the African Digital Compact that we submitted to the UN, and also now we are also formulating a common position on the WSIS Plus 20, and we are going to articulate the same position. So also we are also advocating for a seat for Africa when it comes to AI policy making and AI governance. I think it's very important. I think the membership of the G20 that you mentioned, I think this is a step forward. But I think it's very crucial because Africa has been left behind in many of the decision making in the previous century. But I think we need to position ourselves more when it comes to in the global decision making when it's come to AI. I think it's very crucial that we are part of this decision-making process, and this is what we are going to articulate when we develop our WSIS Plus 10 position, African common position on WSIS Plus 20, sorry.
Plus 20. Thank you so much, Adil, and thanks very much to our panelists and our audience who've sat with us for so long at such an end of a long day. And to Christelle and people online, thank you so much for staying with us. And finally, to our audio and crew people here for indulging us with a few extra minutes. Thank you so much.
And to you for the excellent moderation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really good.
Thank you.